that was a hard thing for me because I was so attached to, records and what my worth was around that. But it's the same concept I'm telling to these kids, I'm like, win or lose, it's not changing who you are as a person. And you have to be willing to come back, every time you fail, to just pick yourself back up and keep going, because it's not about the records. And I was saying this to kids, and then I'm like, well, dang it, I have to say that to myself, and it's like, it seems so simple, and from the outside in, it's so simple, but
practicing it yourself?
Practicing it yourself is so hard when everyone in sports revolves around numbers, wins, records, performance, and nothing revolves around you as a person. It's hard to, when you're in that spotlight, to be able to say, no, I'm good as I am. I don't need anything more than what I can give.
Most of the time when people think of you both as these perennial figures of athletes, there's this one-dimensional sense that people get of just, you are what you've achieved, you are that person that we see, on television. But what's been so cool about getting to know both of you is that there's so many dimensions to you, Ricky, and so many dimensions to you, Lindsey. And so I'm just excited to find those points of connections. And I know, Ricky, when we were talking before too, just about different elements of Lindsey's story, I know community was one thing that was really something that stood out to you a lot, just in terms of her story, yeah?
Yeah, community, and also, with fame, a lot of times when you meet people for the first time, they have all these ideas of like who they think you are. And at least for me, there's a process of like an onion, peeling back all those layers that people have already ascribed, that are part of us, and to try to like get someone to actually appreciate and see like who's underneath the achievements.
Yeah.
Because I always felt the achievements were great, but I feel like sometimes people forget that there was a soul or something inside that was doing all the work to create those achievements.
And I think with sports too, people like to criticize the sport as, their performance, what they did or didn't do, but then they forget that that's an actual person. I think oftentimes, especially with social media, everyone likes to point fingers at people, and like especially on basketball teams or football teams, and they are so overly critical, and people forget that that's a person, and they forget what they're experiencing and what they've been through in their life and what they're going through on that day. And I feel like most people they lose that personal connection. They forget that they're a person. There's so many layers to that onion that they have no idea what's underneath, but they judge. And I think judgment is probably the one thing that I really dislike about sports, because it's not just judgment of your athletic ability, but it's also of you as a person.
It's almost like too, society feels now emboldened, like you mentioned with social media and just all the different outlets, to like people feel entitled to that judgment, right? And for me, I have no way of relating to that because I'm not an athlete and I haven't been scrutinized in those ways. But I wonder, so much of what we talk about is expressing ourselves and just being free to be who we are and not have to edit. I imagine that judgment that you receive so much as athletes makes it incredibly hard to even feel like you ever have spaces or like to just be yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I was always really authentic. I never hid from anything, and I was always myself, but I think, I got a lot of criticism for being myself, and I think that for me it was a little bit different because, I tried to, no matter if I won or lost, I was always the same person, but winning helped lessen the judgment, so it was a lot easier for me when I won, and I think that drove the cycle of wanting to win, but also hating to lose because of not just me being a competitor, but also what that meant from, a media perspective and a fan perspective. I mean, I was thankful that, I had a lot of great fans that came out to support me at the races, but online was a whole nother ball game, and that for me was a really difficult thing to process and handle. And eventually get thick enough skin to actually, somewhat handle it. It's never perfect. I sometimes have to clap back at some trolls, but
It's a normal reaction, yeah.
Early in my career, I went through a lot of the same things. I was really sensitive to judgment. I thought when I finally made it, people would see me and appreciate me, but it was kind of the opposite. And we were talking earlier, and being away from the game and reflecting and trying to like find meaning in everything I went through, I realized that it was training for life, and I realized that it did help me grow thicker skin, because there was a lot of things in my life that I wasn't doing because I was afraid of the judgment. And it helped me like learn about myself and build my confidence to be able to like break free of all those things.
yeah, I agree. I think if you can apply that same mentality that we do for our physical performance and what we do in our sport, if you can translate that into mental health, that's a game changer. And that's something that I've really tried to help, some kids that I mentor. They come to me and they're depressed or they're anxious and they don't know how to handle things, and they're crying all the time, and I'm like, listen, you need to first and foremost take care of yourself as a person.
Yeah.
And when you take care of yourself as a person, the athlete will prosper as well.
Yeah.
And not just for right now, but forever.
Yeah.
And no one's really taking care of younger athletes, of kids, who I feel like are progressively getting younger and younger, with specialized coaches and trainers, and everyone wants to have this, wunderkind that's going to be the next LeBron, and that's just most likely not going to happen. And they're putting so much effort into being the athlete, and there's none to little effort put into how do I build my child's life, their mental stability, their stability as a human being. And I think if we could, to your point, combine those things together, where you're building the body and mind, that would create strong human beings that can go on well past sports to do amazing things.
I mean, that's my vision. Even relationships. I remember like the worst point in my life where I was just in like the lowest point. On the field, everything was great. I was performing, but my personal life was a mess. And I just thought, like, what if I could apply whatever I'm doing on the field to my personal life? Like, I feel like things would get better. And I started experimenting with it and doing it, and surely enough, things got better. Yeah. I think the warrior mentality, the mentality of a high performance athlete, I think it's necessary for mental health.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think if you can build that strength, because I feel like I really built a lot of mental strength when it comes to handling pressure and, performing on the spot and, building tough skin to deal with, media or whoever's judging me at the time. I built those skills myself, but if you could teach those or help guide people to be able to learn those skills, that's what's translated for me into my post-skiing career life, having the ability to perform under pressure and deal with, so many things that are going on, multitasking, all of those things I learned myself through sport, but no one's teaching that. That's something that I learned and I wish I had support on when I was younger. And I think, again, if you can teach kids how to work through anxiety and work through pressure and be able to handle that. And it's like at every stress point, if you can learn to handle that stress, when the next stress comes, you're that much more able to handle it. And it's just a perpetual cycle of being a really strong person, top to bottom. And I think that's something that we should really foster in our kids.
Why do you mentor folks? I'm curious about that.
So my foundation is we have programs and scholarships for underserved girls, and our mission is to empower them, whether that's through financial support or our empowerment programs. But for me, I did it because I was inspired by Peekaboo Street, who is my idol. I went to a ski shop when I was 9 years old, and I met her for 90 seconds.
How
and I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. This is who I want to be. And so that was that's kind of how I started with helping kids, is trying to emulate that empowerment, what peekaboo gave to me unknowingly, to actually try to give that to others. And so I see this change in kids when I am able to connect with them and I'm able to share my story and empower them and, say, I've had bad days too. Everyone has bad days. And they're like, really? That it's like some basic things that I tell them they're shocked by. And it's just no one's teaching those things. If I teach them how to reframe. So, if someone says, well, you're not going to make the soccer team, and they say, okay, I quit. I'm never going to be good. My soccer life is over. And they're like 10 years old, right? Instead of thinking that negatively, they could reframe it into saying, okay, I'm going to work harder and I'm going to try out for the team next year. And they don't think like that. And no one's teaching them to think like that. So that's how I started, kind of getting into the mentorship. And then obviously I think when I stopped my career, it was, people started coming to me more, not just young kids, but, athletes that I actually competed with, athletes that, are professional tennis players, from men to women, everyone just started kind of asking me questions. How do you deal with this injury? How do you mentally overcome this? And I enjoy it because I think for me, that's one of the best things that I can do is to share my experience to help others. And if I can empower someone to be a better version of themselves, then I think I've done my job as an athlete. And that's, I feel like, my responsibility to do that.
Both of you were exceptional, the best at what it is that you do with sport, but it creates more of that mythicalness. Like I think of Michael Jordan growing up, and I think like, in my mind, he was so one-dimensional. He just was this person. I think for so many people, they probably look at both of you in those one-dimensional ways. I wonder, both of you have been vulnerable, so vulnerable, right? In sharing your journeys and even just sharing out loud some of your struggles. I wonder, has that changed how people approach conversations with you? Like, do you find more people coming to you with a level of vulnerability as a result of you taking that step?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I want to touch on something you said about the mythic quality, and I think there's two versions. And the first version is like Michael Jordan, where it's the false myth, the myth of perfection. And then there's the real myth of like human effort and working through your stuff. And I felt like I wanted to be an example of the real myth, because if the myth of perfection, like, it doesn't inspire anyone because they think they can't achieve it. But the myth of someone being vulnerable and working through their stuff and getting to the other side, I think that's myth in the real sense of the word, that it can actually inspire people when they're in the thick of it to be able to reframe. Because it's one thing to talk about reframing, but when you see someone actually reframe their life and turn it around, like, that's real.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of athletes probably are trapped in that place of like, do I take that risk, right?
Yep.
And what was it for you? Why take the risk for you to go into that place of like, all right, you know what? I could just be in this safe, comfortable, greatest skier of all time place. I could be the mythical figure, or I could invite myself into that second frame that Ricky mentioned. What led you to decide that you wanted to be vulnerable and out loud with your journey, your mental health story?
I felt like I got to a point where I was really going through a tough time with, I was getting divorced, and it was publicly just a really difficult time. And I had all these emotions that I wanted to say, and I had to put on the good face, I had to be strong, and I had to be a good example. And I felt like I had to get it off my chest to be able to move forward. And when I finally said, like, I have depression, I felt so much better, but I started to get then questions from people. Like, a lot of people didn't quite understand. It was 2012, and everyone's like, well, you just won the Olympics and everything else. That doesn't make sense. And, really only Michael Phelps and Kevin Love were kind of starting to talk about it. Actually, I think it might have been before them, but the conversation wasn't being had, and people were like, what's wrong with you? Like,
wow.
are you okay today? Do you need medication? I'm like, That's not how it works.
Yeah.
It's not like you take a Tylenol and, like when I'm feeling sad, that's not how it works. And, while it made me feel really good to talk about it, it also, I think, was a really big eye-opener that there was no conversation, and I always knew there was no conversation, but it made it very clear that people's stigma around mental health was actually a lot bigger than I even expected it to be. But then at the same time, I got really authentic people who, were like whispering, I have depression too. I'm like, why are you whispering? Like, whoa, why is this a secret? Like, let's just talk about it. That's the point, is to share our experience and help each other and build this community and, create resources for people. And, I didn't have that, and most people don't. And I think, again, that's part of the positive part of this conversation, is that we are opening the door and continuing to open the door and find more resources for other people and giving them the voice to be able to talk about it themselves.
Yeah, I want to come back to the idea of the myth, because we are the myth makers, but it's like the myths are passed down. And so the myth we got was we're not supposed to, we can't,
That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. And I feel like as I'm getting older and more mature, thank goodness, that it's dawning that like it's up to us. It's up to us, and I think part of innovation or evolution or growth is questioning the received wisdom.
Wow. Questioning, but we're not really encouraged or taught that.
As an athlete, there's this weird balance between the structure and the creativity and experimentation. Right? If you experiment too much, you get too far off the structure. If you don't experiment enough, you get stuck, and you get bored. And it's the same thing in life. And I know with me and just being a football player, I just got stuck. There wasn't much room for experimentation about how to be, in a locker room. This comes to community, the people we surround ourselves with, or the groups we associate with. When I was associated as a football player, there are certain ways that I was supposed to act, certain ways that I wasn't supposed to act. And some of those ways made me a better person. Some of them felt like I was in a box. And until I realized that, and I started to be more conscious about the people I surrounded myself with, mainly because we shared the same goals, then I felt more supported. Because that was the other thing. I was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. And when I thought about it, I thought about social anxiety. The people I'm around give me anxiety. Does that mean there's something wrong with me, or does that mean maybe I need to hang around other people?
That might not be the right fit. Yeah, square peg, round hole.
Yeah. And then as soon as I traveled, I went on a trip to Australia, and I landed in Australia, and the social anxiety disappeared.
You're cured. Yeah. It was all in Australia. That's all it had to be.
Yeah. And it kind of clicked, maybe I need to look at my life more seriously and ask myself, outwardly I was happy, but inwardly, if there are choices that I can make that are going to make me happier. It scared me because the choices that came up was maybe football isn't what I'm supposed to be doing anymore.
Wow. See, and that's here's the bias in me as the therapist, mental health guy, is I think the boldness that we have in which we fully just truly expressing ourselves, we may lose a lot of followers, but it's a great exercise and a filter for finding who the real ones are.
Yeah.
That belong in that community. And I think in today's world, it's like community. We think we have such a community because we have connection to people on all these different platforms. But the reality is, who actually knows us? Who actually knows our pains, our struggles, our real, who can we be real and vulnerable with? There's so few. I feel like just that idea of, if I express myself and I'm not for everyone, then it only gives me a quicker path to figuring out who my community is. It's just as simple as that. Now, granted, for me, again, without having the scrutiny on me and all the eyeballs, it's easy to say that because there is a lot on the line. And it's not just the sport, it's also the brand deals, or it's also the public perception, and there's so many things. It just, there's, I think that's a part that a lot of people who are judging from the sidelines or on Twitter, that they miss that about how tough it must be to be an athlete in that position.
We were talking earlier about maturity, and I think when we play a sport or a game for a long time, it can, in a lot of ways, retard the maturation process, because when people are out there living and having experiences, we're doing a specific kind of training and we become like world class at one thing. As much as, all the time and effort I put into being a football player, I didn't have like a way to take all of those innate skills and turn them into something. I did an inventory of my life. I went back and I was like, what are the things that I really enjoy doing? And I realized that I really like talking to people and showing them different perspectives, and then they feel better. And so I thought, I want to try to learn skills that can help me do that more. And so I went to school and I started to acquire these skills. And as I did, I realized all of the things I learned in football were applicable. And it gave me a huge advantage over everyone else. The idea of like, it's just you, don't make excuses. Like you can overcome anything, just center yourself. And if we can start to reframe what sports are all about, I think we can flip this thing on its head. Because when I was diagnosed and I realized, okay, there's something here that I can work on, right? All of my energy went to like conquering this. And I got better and I kept on going, and the quality of my life really like took off because I approached my stuff with the same way I approached linebackers and safeties.
Well, that's how we work. And that's why we connected so well, is because I'm a very driven person. Like I need goals and I need to like have a path forward that I can work hard, to get to where I want to go. And like, that's what Mondo gave me was, like these are the things that I need to internally work on. And like, how can we sit down and really, get through them and figure out, how do I become the best person that I can be? And once he like mapped it out for me, like I mapped out my skiing career, it became really simple.
Yeah.
And it was really amazing to me how quickly, I got from one extreme to the other, and like really moving forward in a meaningful way outside of what I've always done, which was skiing. Because the skills that we do learn are really applicable, but it has to be channeled in the right way. And it starts also with understanding ourselves and what motivates us and what our passions are and what our fears are and all of those internal questions, because I was really good at having a really thick outer shell, but I never actually went inside the shell. And no one saw inside the shell. The shell was bulletproof, but Mondo helped me peel it back slowly. It's not bulletproof anymore. Well, actually, that's not true. Now I know all the layers that make me bulletproof.
Yeah.
That's probably a better way to describe it.
That is. I love that. It's a great reframe. I think, too, one of the things that, when I think about our journey, too, in that work, and it's similar to exactly what Ricky's talking about, too, is that I think as athletes, it's the coaches or it's the culture needs to shift this message around this idea that, we're not training you necessarily for these outcomes as much as we're training you for this journey that you're going to be on in life. When I met you, it was like you were coming out of skiing. I remember the first conversation we had when you said, I said, I imagine this is hard and that's an understatement. And you said, yeah. What'd you say? Something along the lines of it being your son that you every day.
Yeah, I always referred to, when I retired, I was like, skiing is my son, and everything in my life revolves around it. What time I wake up, what I eat, when I eat, how much I actually work outside of my physical preparation, how much I ski, like everything revolves around my one goal of being the best ski racer in the world. And then one day I retired and I woke up and my son is gone. And I have all of these skills, all of these things that I've learned, my businesses, everything, and then I don't know where they fit. I don't know what direction I'm going in. I have all the pieces, but the puzzle's not together. And so, Mondo helped me find my son, which was me.
Yeah.
Which is you all. And I think it's that that athletes, again, they're not being told from the beginning. Like I remember we went through different profiles of really helping you understand yourself, you understand your strengths, and realizing, wait a minute, these strengths that you have, to Ricky's point, like those were cultivated on the mountain, right? And all those years of single-minded focus, but those strengths that's you. You are the sun. Wherever you go, the light comes with you, right? And you can apply that to that. And because both of you trained at such a high level in the way you applied yourself to your sport, it actually sets you up to be virtually unstoppable in life. But I think so many athletes don't get that message. They get the message of, no, my strength only exists when I'm running with the football. My strength only exists when I'm skiing down a mountain, when in reality, that's you. And it's amazing too, given what you both know, because you both were pioneers, truly. Like you said, 2012 is when you opened up, right? When did you open up about your journey?
2001.
Right.
Yeah.
So you think about this,
That's
right?
OG.
There's OGs here. But both of you have seen this evolution. Both of you were the first ones to jump into the water that no one wanted to jump into. I'm curious, we've talked a little bit about it, but what are some of the things that, what are the specific things that if we could talk to young athletes, like if we were their coaches right now, we were having this conversation about this inner development, what would we want them to be focusing on?
I always think about, for example, I'm mentoring this 9-year-old girl, and I'm trying to help her understand what she needs as a person, not what she needs as an athlete. Helping her, I try to teach her about, journaling and different skills that she can use to figure out who she is. And she's also very hard on herself. And I'm like, you know what? Take a day off. Like, what do you need? Are you overloaded? Do you want to, do you just need to have some ice cream and watch your favorite movie? That's what helped me. But maybe that's not what helps you. But you need to go through the process and the exercise of figuring out what does it take for you to be happy.
Amazing.
And I think that, that's a skill that I think I learned a lot of skills to manage my mental health, but it's also something that I wish I would have focused more on the happiness of me as a person. That would have helped me more when I retired, because I focused on, more of my mental health and how can I perform my best and being alone. And I didn't focus on necessarily the happiness factor.
And there's so many losses in that too, right? That you don't even think about because you're so single-mindedly focused on a goal, right?
Which is great because you have to be. There's an element of, you have to be in the moment. You have to be present. You can't let so many things distract you. And that's, I think, the difficult part is, how do I manage this? How do I manage it in a meaningful way so that I can perform, but that I can take care of myself? And, it's a hard balance, especially if you have no one to talk to. If there's no one there to guide you, you have to figure it out on your own. And that's a really difficult journey to make.
I feel like that's too the spiritual element of life too, right? Like, I was going into juvenile halls, volunteering as a chaplain just to meet with young boys. And I didn't know why, but it was like the one thing I looked forward to the most. It was the thing that I'd get emotional when I left. And then it wasn't until my own journey down the road where I looked and go, yeah, that was like the critical age where you needed that, right? It was like, really, you were looking to meet you. And there was that first thought of like, oh my gosh, is that okay that I'm one? But that's the beauty of life, right? Is like our pain actually can drive us to those bigger mission points. And how beautiful is it that you're able now to give someone in a similar spot what you didn't have at the time?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's that it can, but I think that's the purpose of the pain, And so much of especially the depth psychology literature, that the depression, the anxiety, it's a call.
Dang.
And I think people get stuck. Oh, I'm gonna have to be wrestling with this my whole life. No, if you heed the call, right, you move through it and you get to the other side. I always think of when I talk to people going through like the darkest time of their life, I tell the story of in myths when the hero meets the dragon. And the first time the hero's young, right, naive, thinks they can handle the dragon, right, and they barely escape with their life. Usually they have a scar to prove it, okay? And they're kind of haunted the rest of their life. One day they're gonna have to face the dragon again, right? But when they finally face the dragon and defeat the dragon, that's when they become like superhuman. And that's been my experience, you know. Met the dragon early in life, you know, some parental stuff, okay, and it was kind of doing everything. And I think this is what drives a lot of us towards sports, right? It's a place to put all that energy,
Yeah.
right? It's almost like our obsessive nature, right? It needs a channel, and we're lucky when we're young to find that channel of learning, training, how to develop it, and it's almost like getting us prepared for when we meet the dragon again.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was ready because of my training.
I think my injuries have really taught me a lot. And I think, you know, my injuries were some of the darkest times I've had in my life, but I think it was a time for me to look, you know, inwards and say, you know, why do I want to do this? You know, and I had to find the way. Otherwise, I was never going to come back from anything, you know, and I think you're forced into sometimes these places or, you know, fighting the dragon.
Yeah.
And you have to survive. And, you know, for me, I think every injury taught me something different about myself and what drives me, what my passions are. You know, how do I face this? And again and again and again, so many times. But I think it gives you a different perspective. You know, like when you face the dragon for the first time, when you come back, you have a different perspective. So every time I had a different perspective, which made me a better athlete, but also I think a much stronger person, because I knew I could handle anything.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
Keep throwing dragons at me, y'all. I got so many dragons.
Yeah.
I slayed all the dragons.
That's the gift.
That is the gift. When you're in those moments, you both have experienced injuries. I've always wondered this. It's like, again, we're talking so much about the limited perception that I think fans and folks on the outside have. I think the fans' perspective when someone's injured is simply, you know, oh, well, they're not going to contribute on my fantasy team anymore. Or, you know, like, oh, geez, like, I thought, well, she's on pace to get these many medals and records. And, you know, that's the perception, again, this one-dimensional. And I think what we don't often talk about is how painful and scary that is to, A, go through an injury, period, right, regardless of whether you're an athlete. But also to do that as an athlete, especially when there's so much pressure already, feeling like, this is my identity, so I have to come back. In times when you each were injured, I'm just curious, like, what were some of those darkest thoughts or fears that would pop up in those moments?
I mean, you know, it's like, am I good enough? Can I come back? Can I do it? You know, I think the fear of failure has always been something that's pushed me. And I think my injuries, you know, again, taught me about like my passion. So, you know, that passion has to overcome my fear of failure. And I have to not let those voices control my outcome. You know, I have to put in the work every single day. I mean, injury is like especially if you've had surgery, it's a really grueling process, and you have to want to do it. You have to want to come back so much from major injuries, because you can't make it to the other side if you don't. So I think, you know, facing those voices and those fears is something that, again, made me stronger and realize what I'm capable of.
It's got emotional, the injury conversation, because I think for me it was like, felt like it was when I met the dragon for the first time. And it was this feeling of life's not fair.
Ugh.
You know, and you know, when you go through it the first time, it's like, oh. But as you get on the other side and you accept that life's not fair, you know, then it, like, at least for me, it forced me to grow up and realize life is what I make it, and it's how I handle the situation.
And life's not fair because, again, like for the athlete, you're told, do this, get this, right? And it's like that whole little injury part is just not in the equation. And so it's like that crisis of almost trust, right? Like almost betrayal.
Yeah, it's a spirit, at least for me, it's like a spiritual crisis, you know? Because up until, you know, I got hurt my rookie season, and up until then, I never missed a game, you know. And so in my mind, the trajectory of my life, like, I saw it. You know, I was on that trip, and then it happened, and it was like, and then it happened again, then it happened again, and the dream crumbled, but in its wake, I think a more authentic dream, a more substantial dream was able to emerge.
And when you were in your injury, like I know watching the NFL up close, one thing that has shocked me, and I'm curious what it was for you in skiing, which like you said is more individual, but in the NFL, like being on the sidelines, you watch someone, for me, that I'm working with and have this relationship like you and all of a sudden they go down. My first thing is my heart drops. And you watch almost this military response from the sidelines. And it's not just one sideline, it's every sideline in the NFL of, okay, get them out of here, who's next, right? Yeah. And then that player then is taken and they're separated from the team. So they lost their community. They're going through this painful stuff all alone, and no one is sitting with them to kind of ride through that journey emotionally. For skiing being an individual sport, who was surrounding you in those moments, or was it that same thing, kind of like you're away from the mountain now, and it's, I imagine a huge loss.
I mean, when you're out, no one gives a shit about you. I mean, like, it's stone cold. No, it's like, all right, see ya. Like, come back in a year. Let us know how it goes.
Come back when you're useful, when you can help us out here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same in individual sport. You know, like, the phone's not ringing. No one's coming to see you. It was my family. It was my sister. It was my brother. You know, my brother who I can't rely on for anything. Sorry, buddy, I can't. He was like making me tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches and like, you know, and that was my community, and my family's never wavered in that. Like, my sister was there through so much, and, you know, she was there by my bedside when I had every surgery, and that was a constant. You know, I had my physical therapist, Lindsey, who helped me through probably 75% of my injuries, and she was there day to day, and those are my people, and that's all I had. And then when I come back, everyone's like, all right, time to win. And I did, second race back, but everyone's like, we knew you could do it. I'm like, you don't know shit.
Right.
You're like, you weren't there, you didn't help me, you didn't call. Like, no one calls until you're back winning, when you matter to them. Ugh. And so, like, I think, you know, you have to know why you're slaying the dragon.
Yeah.
You know, why is this dragon here? Why am I slaying it? And when's the next one coming? Because I'm ready.
Because I'm ready, yeah.
And how the hell would you not, after going through that, in addition to knowing your worth is dictated by your performance, like, how would you not have that trend as an athlete to having a hard time maintaining self-worth without the validation or without the performance? I imagine it's such a challenge. That's another thing that I feel like we need to help young athletes with understanding from a young age.
Yeah, what's coming to my mind is the hardest thing was to create a reason for people to want to applaud me or be around me once I couldn't play football anymore. And I was talking to you earlier about, like, when we think of a mature person, we don't think of them like what they do physically. You know, we think of their experience and what they have to give back and what they have to offer. And I think the more we own that responsibility, what we pass on is better than what we received.
I think there's so much attachment to, you know, performance, and like you were saying, you know, your worth is dictated by what other people see, or however many wins you have or records you have. And that was a hard thing for me because I was so attached to, you know, records and what my worth was around that. But it's the same concept I'm telling to these kids, you know. I'm like, win or lose, it's not changing who you are as a person. And you have to be willing to come back, you know, every time you fail, to just pick yourself back up and keep going, because it's not about the records. And I was saying this to kids, and then I'm like, well, dang it, I have to say that to myself, you know? And it's like, it seems so simple, and from the outside in, it's so simple. But
practicing it
yourself is so hard when everyone in sports revolves around numbers, wins, records, performance, and nothing revolves around you as a person. It's hard to when you're in that spotlight to be able to say, no, I'm good as I am. I don't need anything more than what I can give.
And that's because this world is set up around it. From
Yeah.
everything from our Instagram followers to the
Yeah.
engagement on our posts to the numbers, everything is set up to reinforce that. And I feel like that's where we have to create community that's kind of fading the culture in those ways. And I do think it's a great place to kind of end the conversation. I think the three of us together, well, first of all, just thank you. I wouldn't be in this seat without, you're pioneering early on in your journey, having these conversations. You're pioneering, and also you inviting me into your life and allowing me to support you, which I'm forever grateful for, because you're just an amazing person.
No, thank you. You're in my book.
I
Not many people made the book. You made the book.
I was shocked to find out that I made the book. I literally, like that, I'm so appreciative of you. I'm so appreciative of you. And I think that we're all in this community here of being, we were brave and vulnerable and courageous enough to talk about the things that no one else wanted to talk about. I also think that right now we're, Mental Health Awareness Month, and I think that we've kind of passed this idea of awareness. We need to get to solutions. And I know,
Yeah.
I know that athletes are great with their action-oriented solutions. What are the action points of how we actually solve this mental health crisis and actually see more people adopting what the two of you have been practicing?
Well, I think it's a process, and I think these conversations are what's getting the process started, because, people hear us talking about these things, they feel more empowered to have these kinds of conversations. But what I've pulled out of this conversation is this compartmentalization between being a performer and being a human, And I think, right, that they can come together. And so at the end of my career, what made me most proud was when people were around me, not that I was a good football player, but that I was a nice person, that there was something coming off me that helped them feel better. And that was more valuable than the touchdowns I scored.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's about teaching our youth how to be stronger people. I think, like, how can we empower them, as people, not as athletes or anything else, just as people. How do they cope with the stress? How do they cope with, Instagram and all the other crap that's thrown at them every day? What tools can we, that we've learned, can we share to them to help them deal with life? In my foundation, that's my goal, is to really give them tools, because I love talking about it, and it's the gateway to action. But I think, we need to find a scalable solution that is able to affect so many people from every range of age to culture to geographical location. I think that is something that I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that it needs to start from the ground up. And if you look at kids that have had some sort of disappointment, embarrassment, or failure that they don't know how to manage or deal with, and they have no outlet or resource to figure it out. And so if we can teach them, success is great, but that's not what makes you who you are. Failure is actually what makes you who you are, and how you handle that failure. Failure is a lesson. It is a good thing. Failure to me has been the biggest lesson of my life that has only led to great things. And so if we can teach kids how to handle that, then they can do amazing things.